Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. This morning, because we were reading the third triennial, we didn't read the beginning of our parsha, and I just wanted to read a few of those verses this morning. So God spoke to Moses and said, I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but did not make myself known to them by my name Adonai. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they have sojourned. I have now heard, V'gam ani shamati, the moaning of the Israelites, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am Adonai. This takes us back to Pesach. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary wonders, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. You shall know that I, Adonai, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you for possession, I, Adonai. I remember once being at a workshop for rabbis. It really could have been for anybody in a helping profession, one of those conferences or seminars. We were being asked to reflect how to help someone who's going through a very difficult time, someone who's really carrying the burden, unbearable burden, the weight of loss, our world right now, illness. What do they want? What are they looking for? So in the statement I just read, God begins by saying, V'gam ani shamati, right? I have heard, I have listened, and we're the ones who are supposed to listen also, Shema Yisrael, but God also listens. God hears. And so it says, God heard our groanings because the Egyptians are holding us in bondage. And the verse in Hebrew begins with gam also, and some of the commentators have a whole idea around why you begin a verse with gam. And the Moroccan commentator Or HaChaim says that somehow it indicated more feeling, more mercy. I have also heard. It wasn't just sympathy, it was deep empathy. It was deep empathy what God was trying to convey to the Jewish people. I'm hearing where you are through this terrible burden you're going through. In his words, the cries from the torture you are going through. I'm hearing what you're going through, right? Just life, this life. And it doesn't always mean slavery, but it did for the African slaves, as we were thinking about last week at MLK weekend. And it can be groaning and moaning also of less directly physical pains and torture. But God hears and God feels. And then we have these verses, which are considered to be the promise. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians, deliver you from their bondage, redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will bring you to the land. This is a different training, right? What is sympathy? Sympathy is, I see your suffering, but I'm keeping it at arm's length. Here, have my sympathies. I don't want to feel what you're going through. Then you have empathy. Empathy is, I hear your pain, and I'm right now doing my best to hold that pain with you. That's empathy. And then compassion is empathy leading to action. That's compassion. And here we have this promise, right? Divine compassion. I hear you and I'm going to take you out. Pretty bold claim. Not many of us who are trying to help someone can take it to that place, taking you out. But this is the core of our story. This is the core of this fundamental story. It tells us part of who we are, the promise of those actions. And in the story, this is what happens. The promise is fulfilled, they're freed, they're redeemed, they're brought to the land. Last summer, when I was on sabbatical, we did a lot of driving, and through almost all of the driving, we listened to a tape for children, but just as good for adults, called The Story of the World. 40 hours long, telling the whole history of mankind. And every civilization is described, their facts, who they are, where they come from, but then the stories that they tell themselves about who they are. So we're driving around France, listening to the Sumerians and the Assyrians and who they are, and the Greeks, the early Greeks, the later Greeks, the Romans, eventually the Vikings and Beowulf and the Saxons. And what really struck me is hearing all these stories is how much each of their own stories tells you about who they are as a civilization, their state of mind, their values, their internal world, their relationship with the unseen elements of the universe. And so few of them describe a universe where there's order. So much of it is about chaos. And so few of them describe a world where there's a moral and spiritual laws that form the backbone of the universe. But ours does. And this is our hope-generating story. That's what we're reading about today. I think whether you believe it in God this way or you believe in God that way, or however you understand God, but there's this promise, this hopeful promise within all of it, that there's a place where the universe hears what we're going through, hears the groaning and the moaning from all the pains and difficulties. But more than that, hard for us moderns, with an outstretched arm and hidden arm comes to rectify the current of the universe, the bend of the arc of the universe is towards justice. But the pain is felt, the slaves are seen, and action is on the table. And the timetable may not be to our liking, but as the Psalms say, one day for God is 1,000 years for us. And then, whenever say this, say, well, Rabbi, what about the Holocaust? What about the Shoah? Well, the Holocaust challenged this story of ours, the central story of God coming to rescue us more than anything else that's ever happened to us. And as Yossi Klein Halevi once wrote, a commentator, not only was God seemingly not there to help us in our hour of deepest suffering and pain, but Jews were being gathered the way we were promised in our oldest prophecies, but for a perverse purpose, not to bring us together to our land, but to gather us for this terrible torture and inhumane ways of being led to our death. And so in the article, Halevi, what he says is that the creation of the state of Israel saved the Jewish people in that moment. Because in God's timetable, just a few minutes later, the Jewish people were gathered and the prophecies were on some kind of level fulfilled. We found a new strength and a new spirit and a new beginning that we could never have imagined. And that was his argument, that without Israel, we would have been a defeated people, our deepest theological beliefs proven to be completely false. And even with all the troubles going on now, we could still hold on to that. We know it depends on all of us, too. And this was what Maimonides said, where he looks at our world and he says, where are all the miracles in our world? And Rav Kook also speaks about this. And they say we have to play our parts. This is what it means to live. It used to be that God was more involved, but definitely now we have to play our parts with the divine in the background. Through all the pains and the sufferings, as we are heard, it's there as a humanity, but we also have to play our part, even though there are strings that are pulled in their own fashion. And that this is really part of this hopeful story, that the universe is going towards greater justice, even if we can't always see it and we can't see how it's happening, but to believe in that is the core of our Jewish path in the world. The arc of the universe is toward justice. And then when we least expect it, those forces will somehow come into the world, give us what we need to move it all forward. Maybe not all the way, right? There's leaving Egypt, and there's crossing the sea, and then there's getting to Sinai, and then there's getting to the land, and taking 40 years later, and then making it our own, and it takes time, but one step at a time. So last week I went to see a movie I really loved, the one about Bob Dylan, the new Bob Dylan movie. It's one of the best movies ever in my mind. And it made me think of the 60s a lot. The times are changing, right? It was not a perfect time, and as someone said, I'd rather be a black person now than back then. So many problems and upheavals. There was also a moment in time when so much was moving forward, opening up. And it wasn't perfect, but there were huge strides forward. And there was this inspiration in the wind, right? There was something to help people find hope and to give them what they needed, the new direction, the new understanding of what it means to be a human being, of what a society could be, that was the vision that was needed to actually take all of us forward. And they helped the whole society wake up. And it was just one step, and then they took a few steps backwards maybe, and it's complicated. But it was a whole society in a moment in time trying to move forward. So coming to our time right now, maybe all that we can do is try and unfurl our own sails to catch some of that breeze, some of that wind, to find that inspiration of what each one of us can do, and to also hold on to that core of our story, of our civilization, of our people, that hopeful story that if we do our part, that wind can turn into something much more powerful. And if we ask the questions of where is everybody and what is going on, how long can this go on, our friends, and if we speak out, and if we march, and we write, hold on to everything that we hold dear, then the transformation will really happen. Shabbat Shalom.